Muninam Patanjalim Pranchaliranatosmi Stuve Patanjalim Vyasam Shankaram Cha Munitrayam Kartrasutrasya Bhashyasya Kramad Vivaranasya Cha. We were discussing the early part of the commentary on the 49th Sutra of Samadhipada, that is Sutta Anumana Prajnabhyam Anya Vishaya Vishesharthatvad. Essentially, it says that the realization, the spiritual enlightenment that you derive from this samapatti is different from or beyond what you can get from either direct perception, inference, or from any other source. Normally, at empirical level, we may see certain things. It's called pratyaksha, direct perception. When we see something, our mind and this sense of vision, sense of sight come together and we see an object. That's how we understand things. That's how we get the knowledge. This is actually a discussion on the epistemology of Yoga Sutras and how the spiritual enlightenment, Ridambhara Prajna, this higher spiritual insight, is beyond whatever you can gain through any of these tools of epistemology. So Yoga Sutra normally, and Yoga and Sankhya both accept Pratyaksha, Anumana and Shabda, direct perception and inference and verbal testimony. Some information you may get some books or maybe by listening to somebody. These are the three tools of knowledge accepted in the epistemology of Sankhya and Yoga philosophical systems. So this particular sutra makes it very clear that the inner spiritual enlightenment that we gain, that we obtain through this higher insight, Ridambhara Prajna, this samapatti, it is this knowledge beyond whatever you gain from any of these tools of knowledge. So I shall try to explain this. This is a very important sutra. And in fact, it actually answers many of the questions that we normally ask. Sometimes people ask, if I practice yoga, why can't I immediately get something? Or when I read something, why can't I get this peace of mind? People ask these questions. We should know very well that when we read something or when we come to know of something, either from a book or by listening to a conversation, it is only a word, and that word is totally different from the spiritual experience that particular word denotes. And as I mentioned earlier, there are three tools of knowledge that Sankhya and Yoga systems accept. In Sanskrit, it is called Pratyaksha, Anumana and Shabda. In modern English, we can say direct perception. Direct perception here means whatever we gain at empirical level using our mind and eyes, mind and ears, mind and sense of touch, mind and sense of smell, and mind and the sense of taste. That's how we know things. Direct perception. It's not possible for us to obtain this higher knowledge through direct perception. Anumana is inference. Those who know Aristotelian logic will be familiar with this. we do inference. Suppose you see you see a lot of smoke coming from the top of a mountain, you assume that there could be fire on the mountain because you are seeing this association of smoke and fire in previous experiences. Another tool of epistemology is shabda. I mean, you may read from a book or you may get information from somebody. See, there's only three means of knowledge in Sankhya and Yoga. In many ways, it is very similar to Aristotelian logic, which is beyond the scope of our discussion, the subject that we are discussing today. Now, this sutra tells you, Sudha Anumana Prajnabhyam Anya Vishaya Vishesharthatvad. So, this Ritambhara Prajna that we discussed earlier in the 48th Sutra, we remember this awareness, this higher awareness, we may call it a mystical vision or mystical understanding of something. Roughly that corresponds to, though not exactly. Thus, this higher spiritual awareness is impossible to obtain through any of these tools of knowledge. It is beyond that. And that is agreeable to Vedanta also. In fact, Vedanta accepts three more tools of knowledge. Pratyaksha, Anumana, Upamana, Shabda, Arthapatti and Anupalabdhi. These are 6 tools of knowledge in Vedanta. Pratyaksha, as we know, direct perception. Anumana is inference, we already mentioned. Upamana is comparison. Suppose you see an animal somewhere and somebody tells you this animal that I saw is very similar to a cow. So you can imagine there is a similarity. There's some kind of a knowledge from analogy or comparison. The fourth one is Shabda, Shabda Pramana, I mean from verbal testimony. And the fifth one is a kind of Arthapatti. It is a necessary supposition of a unperceived fact. I mean, from something that you infer. The example that is given is very simple. Suppose there is a very, very fat person, extremely fat, and you find that he is not eating anything during the daytime. But it's impossible for a person who doesn't eat anything during the daytime and who doesn't eat anything at night to become fat like that. So you assume that he's eating the whole night. So that is how they give this interpretation. It's called Arthapatti. Anupalabdhi is nothing but, you understand the absence of something through non-comprehension. That is Anupalabdhi. So 6 tools of knowledge in Vedanta. Now we should remember that Vedanta also, you can find the statement, this higher spiritual experience is beyond all tools of knowledge. It is called Sarvapriyananda, means it is beyond the realm of whatever tools of knowledge that we can employ. Either you can see things at empirical level, you can infer, you can compare, or you can use your own some kind of a extended inference called Arthapatti, or you may read from a book, or you may come to know of the absence of something through non-comprehension, which is called Anupalabdhi. So the point is, this higher spiritual knowledge is beyond the realm of empirical cognition, empirical comprehension. That important point is brought out in this well-known sutra. This is a famous sutra from the epistemological point of view of yoga philosophy. So sutra we already started discussing. We started the discussion of the Bhashya, the commentary by Vyasa. Vyasa's commentary is Sudam Agama Vijnananta Samanya Vishayam na hi agamena shakyo visheshaka abhidhadum kasmad. The point is. Now, uh, whatever we try to understand through Sruti Pramana, Agama, that is Agama Pramana, or inference or any other means, that knowledge is one thing, but the spiritual enlightenment that you derive through this Ridambhara Prajna, this higher mystical insight that we discussed in the previous sutra. These are two different things. And the reason is given, Nahi agamena shakyo visheshaha abhidhadum kasmad. Now Vishesha and Samanya, two words are used here. That should be explained before we go further into this commentary. Suppose somebody utters the word cow. You get an idea, well, it is a cow, you get an idea in your mind, it's an animal. And you know what it is. But that knowledge is one thing. That is called Samanya, is general knowledge. The word is used here in this commentary by Vyasa. A general knowledge. Similarly, people talking about Samadhi, people talking about Samapatti, people talking about Nirvana. You can find a lot of conversations nowadays. In the blogs, there are all kinds of people writing about Kundalini raising, all these energy flooding all over the place. You can see all these things being discussed. Now, they discuss all these ideas, but you don't find they are able to clearly explain what it implies. So they know this word. Say you know cow. It's an animal, that's okay. But suppose you want to know this particular cow with this color, with these physical characteristics, with this size or shape, that cow belongs to X, Y or Z, this person or that person. It is called specific knowledge, called Vishesha. Now, Vishesha in the context of Yoga or Vedanta means inner experience. This is an important point, remember. What we read in books, what we know by listening to ideas, that's good. It has its own importance, it has its own relevance, it is very important, that's how we begin. But that understanding is different from actually having a bit of that real experience. That experience is Vishesha, means specific. This is an important point, remember. I already mentioned this some time ago in music, for example. In the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, you can find this dialogue between Maitreyi and Yajnavalkya. See, suppose a person, somebody is playing a music, wonderful music. If you are yourself a musician, then you will be able to understand the specific characteristics of the particular composition that a musician is playing in front of you. You will be able to appreciate it. You will be able to understand it. You will be able to enjoy listening to the music. You may get engrossed in that music. That is specific characteristic, Vishesha. But suppose another person who may not know much about music, but he also is listening to this sound, this speech, the sound system, the speech that is, that's the particular voice that is coming. He is also enjoying music, but is enjoying music in a very general sense, called Samanya. So there are two dimensions to music, and there are two dimensions to spiritual understanding or spiritual comprehension as well. When you get experience, it's like listening to your music and enjoying the music, appreciating the music in all its various technical aspects. But if you are not trained in music, you may be attracted by the symphony, the sequence of the sound system. Similarly, in spiritual knowledge also, whatever we understand and appreciate and cognize at the empirical intellectual level, using different tools of knowledge, we call it epistemological knowledge, theory of knowledge, that is only general, but actual experience is something different. I can make this more clear by taking a simple example from Sri Ramakrishna. Sri Ramakrishna says, somebody gives a very beautiful, wonderful lecture on milk, for example. Milk is so wonderful. It's very good to drink and it's very nutritious. That's one thing. That is only general. But actually drinking milk every day in a measured quantity according to instructions of a expert doctor, we experts in dieting, whatever it is, and getting nourished by drinking that milk, that is real experience. So that's the point to be kept in mind. Now you can come to the Bhashya. Those who have got the text can refer to it, or of course I shall try to explain. Nahi Visheshena Krita Sanketaka Shabdaiti. So, whatever instructions you get, whatever words you read, cannot describe the particular properties of anything. It can only give a general idea of what the words are trying to denote. Tatha anumanam samanya vishayameva. Similarly, inference. It's very important that we should know this part of this commentary by Vyasa very well. Vyasa makes it very clear that we should read, that's important. We should listen to, that's important. Swadhyaya. Swadhyaya is a very important spiritual discipline. One should read books, because reading good books, listening to great ideas is like investing some money in a spiritual bank. The spiritual bank in which you invest spiritual samskaras. You generate spiritual impressions, spiritual qualities. For that, reading, listening to is important. But that is only the beginning of spiritual journey. We have to begin somewhere, but one should not stop there. That is an important point to remember. So, direct perception or inference cannot really be called or cannot be equated with the higher spiritual experience, which is Vishesha. Then they gives an example, yatra praptihi tatra gatihi, yatra praptihi tatra na bhavadi gatihi ityuktam. That's again an example is taken to explain the technique of inference. Today's class may be slightly a bit boring and maybe dry. That's because it deals with a lot of epistemology. But sometimes we also need that also. It's important to take some interest in philosophy, because that will strengthen our mind, that will give a sublime dimension to our thinking process. We should be able to enjoy what is not absolutely utilitarian, what is not entirely practical. This is very important. If you become obsessed with practicality or utilitarian practicality, then we will never have peace of mind. One should be able to sit and relax and read great philosophical books for its own sake. This is an important thing. That is the only way in modern times for people to get peace of mind. If a person is busy all the time pressing a button, maybe computer keys maybe, or pressing a button maybe, working in a laboratory maybe, or with the intention of making something which may increase your bank balance little every day, we should be able to enjoy doing things, knowing fully well that what we do will not increase our bank balance. We should be able to enjoy doing things, knowing fully convinced that our actions are not going to make an extra dollar in our life. Then only we can enjoy Yoga Sutra, then only we can enjoy spiritual learning, and then only we can enjoy Emerson, Whitman or Thoreau, then only we can enjoy Aristotle and Socrates. Not only Shankaracharya's books of Vivekananda's books, Sri Ramakrishna's books, even to enjoy Socrates and Aristotle, Emerson and Thoreau, we should try to read things, understand things, and we should be able to enjoy even without proper understanding. I should understand completely, absolutely well whatever little things I am listening to, then we are not going to move 1 inch forward. We should be able to listen to things without properly understanding everything. Then only it means there are many things that we are not able to understand right now, which we may understand tomorrow. So we will be making progress. If you are obsessed with the idea, I should know every little bit I am listening to, then we can listen to the English alphabet, which we understand perfectly well, but we won't be making an inch progress. So that's why little bit of epistemology may not be altogether without practical usefulness. So here it is, tatha anumanam samanya vishayameva. So here Vyasa says, inference also can give you only a general understanding of things. Inference can give you a theoretical understanding, not the real experience. Yatra praptihi tatra gatihi. Yatra praptihi tatra na bhavati. Gati means, see here, it's taken from inference. Again, you have to remember the old syllogism, the stock phrase used while explaining the idea of inference. Suppose we see the smoke coming from a mountain at a distance, we immediately assume, we infer that there could be fire somewhere close to the place from where the smoke is coming. That's because yesterday we may have seen a place from where smoke was coming, and then after some time we found this fire. Now that association is already there in our memory system. So today we are seeing smoke coming from a distant mountain. Just so understand there could be fire. Now the point is, where there is gati, where there is prapti, where there is hedu or lingam is called, where there is the tool for inference, there could be fire. There is smoke, there is fire. If there is no smoke, there may not be any fire. That's the idea behind. Ityuktam anumanena cha samanyena upasamharaha. So, whatever amount of inference you use, it only can give you only a very general idea of what you are trying to know. That's the idea behind. Tasmat sudanumana vishayaha na vishesha. Therefore, vishesha means specific knowledge. In the context of our present sutra, what it means is the Ridambhara Prajna, this higher spiritual awareness that you derive through this samapatti, this samprajnata yoga that goes beyond dharana. It is possible only when you go beyond the general. And this higher wisdom cannot be derived through either Shabda Pramana or Anumana Pramana or Shabda or Pratyaksha Pramana. Direct perception is Pratyaksha, the first one, then Anumana, then Shabda. Now the point is, why this is important? Why this is important? Why logic is important in philosophy, spiritual learning? This is very important. Epistemology is very important in spiritual life. Philosophy is very important in spiritual life. You may have seen this. Many of the greatest spiritual teachers were endowed with great brains, great reasoning power. You can find the same reasoning power in some of the simple statements, either the Sermon on the Mount, in the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, or in the poetical works of Shankaracharya, not only in the great philosophical classics. You can find the simple logic and also this profound logic. That's because philosophical analysis prevents our mind from taking obsessive extremes, sudden obsessive liking certain things, sudden obsessive swinging in one direction will be automatically followed by the opposite momentum of the mind. Now, mind should be kept in a state of stability, tranquility, and steadiness. And for this purpose, understanding logic, reading philosophical books is very important. It doesn't mean that logic and philosophy can take you to the spiritual realization. No. In fact, it cannot take. That's what the present sutra tells you. But this logic and philosophy play a very important creative role. You know why? It helps you to become reasonable with yourself. That's an important thing. We should go beyond reason by using reason. That's an important point in Vedanta. In Vedanta, in fact, Adi Shankaracharya, who wrote all the most profound philosophical classics, he himself says the truth is beyond all these books. Then why did he write all the wonderful books? You won't actually understand the truth is beyond the books without actually getting an idea of what these books contain. You may need not study those books, but you should get that wisdom from a teacher who may tell you that the truth is beyond the books. So the books and ideas and reasoning power will help us to go beyond reason, beyond books. That's why Shankaracharya says, Sutya, Yuktya, Swanambhutya. We should read books, use our reasoning power, Yukti, and then make it our own experience. So this is an important point that should be kept in mind. Again, Vyasa continues, Anumanena cha samanena upasamkaraka tasmat sudanumana vishayo na visheshaka kaschidasti iti. Therefore, the specific understanding, the spiritual experience itself is beyond any of the tools of knowledge in Vedanta and also in yoga. It's accepted. It is said that, you can use words only if there are these 5 conditions or any of these conditions are prevalent or existing. It's called Panja Shabda Pravritti. Means 5 methods of reasoning or analyzing. Then only you can actually explain or describe something. It is called, it's called Jadi Guna Drivya Karma Sambandha. For example, when you want to explain something, Jadi, particular category it belongs to, let's say the human species or some other species, or characteristics. Suppose you want to explain a flower, red flower, green flower, white flower, or whatever it is. And in Dravya, something which is self-evident. You can compare, it's like moon or like sun. Nobody will ask you the question, what is sun? So it is self-evident. Another is karma, action. You can explain something on the basis of its utility, or if you are explaining a person, you can explain his characteristics on the basis of what he is doing, what he is very good at doing. He is a musician, he is a gardener, he is a driver, or he is an artist, he is a poet, whatever you can say. Another one is connection, relationship. You may explain a person, I don't know him That's one way of explaining, or he's my friend or whatever it is, or he's my uncle or whatever it is, some better relationship. Now, the spiritual realization, the spiritual wisdom that you derive through this Ridambhara Prajna that we already explained in the 48th Sutra, that higher wisdom, or we may call it mystical experience, cannot be explained or described through any of these means. I mean, these 5 conditions of description or verbalization is called Pancha Shabda Pravritti. So it is called Pancha Shabda Pravritti Nishedha. In Vedanta, it is said that the highest spiritual experience cannot be defined, cannot be explained, cannot be described, can only be experienced, because it is beyond the 5 conditions of verbalization. Like that, Vyasa says, the specific knowledge which only Ridambhara Prajna, we call Samadhi Prajna, another name, or Samapatti Prajna. The Prajna, this higher spiritual awareness, a mystical awareness, so to speak, which alone can give you this higher understanding of truth. It is beyond any of these verbalizations. Nacha asya sukshma vyavahita viprakrishtasya vastunaha loka pratyakshena grahanamasti. Nacha asya visheshasya apramanigasya abhavaka asti iti samadhi prajna nigrahya eva sa visheshaka bhavati. Bhuta sushmagada va purushagato va. So it's a very long sentence. So those who got the book, you need not, if you listen to this, then even if you don't read it, you will understand, because I'm giving a descriptive exposition of this famous part of Vyasa's commentary in Sanskrit. So what it says is this: Nacha asya sukshma vyavakida viprakrishtasya. So this anumana or pratyaksha or shabda, I mean this inference, direct perception or verbal testimony, it cannot explain something which is subtle, that is sukshma, subtle, and vyavahita means something which is hidden, which is not visible at the empirical level. You can easily understand this. When we actually grow in spiritual wisdom, it may not be always empirically or physically visible or tangible. In our attitude, especially when we face certain situations in life, this higher wisdom manifests itself. Otherwise, we won't know that we are actually making spiritual progress. So, inference or explain or take you to a knowledge of this subtle spiritual truth, because it is vyavahita, it means it is hidden, it is invisible, it is concealed from our empirical perception. Then it is viprakrishta, means it is distant, far away. This higher spiritual wisdom is far away, very distant from the empirical plane. Whatever is understandable or whatever is tangible at empirical level, worldly level, we can connect with, we can see, we can recognize using our senses of perception. Using the eyes and mind you can see. Using ears and mind you can hear. So also sense of touch, sense of smell, sense of taste, all the 5 senses of perception. And mind together can perceive and cognize everything at the empirical level. But this spiritual wisdom, which is the product of the Ridambhara Prajna, that should be always kept in mind. Ridambhara Prajna means Samadhi Prajna. This higher spiritual wisdom that comes to a person through the practice of yoga, yama, niyama, asana, pranayama, pratyahara, dharana, dhyana, samadhi, etc. Now, if any of you have got any doubt, I can explain this. Think of a person who practices the basic 10 disciplines, yamas and niyamas. If a person, if any individual who practices for a long time in his life, non-violence, truthfulness, no desire for things that belong to others, purity of life, contentment, mental purity, external and internal purity, reading scriptures or connecting with higher ideas all the time, or as a sense of surrender to God. Suppose if any person who practices any of these disciplines in his or her life, he thinks differently or she thinks differently. He interprets life differently. He interacts with people differently from a higher perspective. What does it mean? These 10 values form the foundation from which he can launch his spiritual journey through asana, pranayama, pratyahara, etc. It's a simple example. Any person who practices these disciplines, you can see, you can feel the difference in his presence or in her presence. What does it mean? It is not, it cannot be explained. It cannot be understood by direct perception. You may not have any specific physical characteristics that make him stand out from other people. But he may be a spiritually enlightened person. So you can see, of course, I give the example of Gandhi. The reason why I give Gandhi as an example is Gandhi was not a mystic sitting under a tree or in a cave. He was a politician, enlightened politician. Now, you can imagine a man like him. Again, you don't call Gandhi Saint Francis of Assisi, like you don't say Saint Gandhi, you don't say. But everyone admits he was a Gandhi, he was a saint. And he was a politician, mind you, running a political party, organizing mass movements against the foreign rulers and all that. You don't expect such person to be endowed with this Ridambhara Prajna. Well, we cannot say he was not endowed with Ridambhara Prajna. Why? Because he was fully established in yamas and niyamas. So once a person gets established 100% yamas and niyamas, so he naturally begins his spiritual journey through asana, pranayama, pratyahara, etc. Not physically visible, but it is so subtle. That's why Vyasa says it is, he says, for example, sukshma, not clearly visible, it is subtle. Again, vyavahita, not tangible, but concealed, not externally cognizable. And then viprakrishta, I mean, that higher knowledge is distant and different from the empirical knowledge that you get from either direct perception or inference. And then he says, now the question arises, when you say all this, somebody may say, and then loka pratyakshena grihanamasti. Loka pratyakshena grihanamasti. This higher knowledge, loka pratyakshena na grihanamasti, that's it mean. It cannot be understood through ordinary persons, ordinary empirical perspective. Loka pratyaksha means, loka means ordinary empirical. Pratyaksha means obvious. It is not obvious. It is not obvious from the ordinary empirical perspective. Nichasya visheshasya apramanikasya abhavasti. Now, people may say this, well, such a subtle things, well, we can no proof to show that this higher Ridambhara Prajna, higher spiritual wisdom exists. Now here, remember, in many of these ancient classical works, you can find the commentator assumes that there are people who take a different perspective, who may tell you, no, such thing cannot exist. You can find in modern times also agnostics and atheists. There are wonderful people among them, very wonderful people. I have respect for many of them. And many of their views are perfectly very rational. But not everything that they say. So the point is, such people may say, this higher wisdom doesn't exist. That counterpoint, that criticism is assumed by Vyasa. So he says, Nachasya visheshasya apramanikasya abhavagasti. You cannot say that such a higher wisdom is non-existent. You cannot say it's just a myth, just an idea. It doesn't have a real, it doesn't have a reality. It's just a myth or an idea. Such a view may be put forward by some critics. Some Vyasa assumes that kind of objection from some maybe materialists or maybe agnostics of his times. That he says, no, you cannot say, you cannot assume that this higher wisdom is just a myth. You cannot say it doesn't exist. Because he says, Samadhi prajna nigrahya eva sa visheshaka bhavati. This higher Samadhi prajna, it's called Ridambhara prajna that we already discussed earlier. There are people in this world endowed with this higher spiritual vision, this spiritual perspective. People who can look beyond what is empirically visible. There are people, if they did not exist, the world is not really worth living in fact. If you can imagine, the world is just meant for our enjoyment, just for making money, just for making wealth, just for physical enjoyment, then in many ways we are not very different from the animal kingdom, because they also need whatever we need. But there is something higher in the human system that helps us to look beyond the empirical. So Vyasa says, we cannot agree when some people say that there is no pramana, there is no proof, there is no direct perception or inference as a proof to show that such a higher wisdom can really exist. We cannot agree with people who say that such a thing doesn't exist. Vyasa says that there is a proof. What is the proof? Samadhi prajna, Ridambhara prajna. There are people endowed with this higher spiritual wisdom. Samadhi prajna nirgrahya eva, nirminishchayana grahya means there are people who take a different perspective. We can say the great philosophers, the great thinkers, the great mystics, the great spiritual teachers the world has produced. They are the ones who actually made signal contributions. They contributed these higher, eternal, universal, spiritual values that no scientist, no empiricist can ever even imagine. So because they taught and talked about higher things which relate to our own life, to the very purpose of our existence. And it has been going on for the last thousands of years because they realized these great spiritual truths through their samadhi prajna. That's why these great truths are samadhi prajna nigrahya, means it is understood, it is comprehensible, it can be understood through this Ridambhara prajna, through this refined spiritual wisdom. That is the samadhi prajna nigrahya eva sa visheshaka. This higher wisdom, bhavati bhuta sukshma gada va purusha gado va iti. Of course, in the context of Yoga Sutra and Sankhya system, it may relate to the proper understanding of Prakriti the mystery of our human evolution and the nature of Purushas, which is self-effulgence itself. Tasmat Sudarmana Prajnabhyam Anya Vishaya Sa Prajna Vishesha Arthattvadidi. It's a justification of the present sutra. So, in the life of an average spiritual seeker who is worshipping his deity, what it means is reading or understanding from books or reasoning cannot give us a specific direct experience of the nature of the God ideal that we are worshipping in any tradition. You can find the great mystics were those who just crossed the barrier of empirical understanding. There were certainly great mystics who were steeped, well versed in all systems of philosophy, in all theological dogmas and doctrines, no doubt about it. But there were also people who, along with this profound knowledge, theoretical knowledge, they crossed the barrier of theoretical knowledge, who actually entered the realm of inner experience. That inner experience is the result of this Ridambhara Prajna. That actually, without a little bit of the Ridambhara Prajna, it is impossible for us to get real conviction on higher ideals. This is an important psychological mystery, actually, psychological secret. Without some inner conviction, and that conviction based on some kind of an experience, it may not be realization, it may not be in the enlightenment like what Buddha had, nothing like that, but still some kind of a proof or experience, some kind of a distant, remote vision of the higher reality. Either in their own experiences, they may have prayed, they may have found a prayer answered. And then suddenly, well, after all, what I was believing is not just a myth. They may not tell everyone, but without this higher experience that goes beyond the reasoning and beyond the theoretical understanding, it is impossible to get a true and real conviction in God or spiritual values. It doesn't mean that they have realized, no doubt. But when we read books, when we listen to great ideas, and we also experience a kind of inner tranquility, inner contentment, that's actually let's say it is a little bit of a distant glimpse of what we now call Ridambhara Prajna. Because when we read a great spiritual or philosophical classic, and when we are able to enjoy reading that great philosophical or spiritual classic, and when we can leave everything behind and spend our time for that, knowing fully well that it doesn't increase our bank balance a little bit, then there is the strength of some kind of an inner experience. The experience may become deeper and deeper as we evolve in spiritual life. That is a proof of the truth of the Ridambhara Prajna. It can be experienced by any person, in any tradition. So that is the sweep and the breadth of this particular sutra and Vyasa's commentary on it. Now we will go to the next sutra, that is 50, sutra number 50. We are coming to the end of the Samadhipada. It's a very important chapter. Now the next sutra is very important. That's 50th, sutra number 50th. Tajjaha samskaraka anya samskara pradibandhini. So this is an important sutra. Now this Ridambhara Prajna also can produce a samskara. And remember, our goal is to reach Nirodha Samskara. Yoga, Chitta, Vritti, Nirodha. That is the definition of yoga. we should be able to do nirodha, we should be able to transcend, go beyond all samskaras. This particular sutra tells you that tajjaha samskara means this subliminal impression, the impression of samskara produced by this Ridambhara prajna, this higher mystical awakening or awareness. It completely obstructs, it blocks other samskaras. So what it means is, when you get this higher spiritual samskara, spiritual impression, that spiritual impression will help you to block and neutralize and negate all the negative samskaras. So this is an important point. In fact, in spiritual life, our first goal is to generate, to create in our mind a great good samskara. That's the first important step towards going beyond samskaras. It's an important point. In the ordinary life, if you want to get rid of, let's say, some undesirable habits, the first step is to create one wonderful, great habit. This is an important thing. One, if we can organize our mental and physical energies in one direction and give a positive, constructive and creative orientation in one good positive direction, that will help us to get rid of, to neutralize all wrong directions. This is an important thing to remember. Like that, the positive impression created by this higher awakening, Ridambhara prajna, will block and neutralize all the existing negative samskaras in the mental system. And this is linked to another sutra which is found in the Vibhudipada, Vyutthana Nirodha Samskarayohu Abhibhava Pratubhavu Nirodhakshana Chittanneka Nirodha Parinamaka. We will discuss that later in the next session. Now we can have interaction. This is going to be a very profound discussion. So we will begin in the next coming, not the coming week, but the week after the next Friday. I will make an announcement about this. Thank you. You are now open for discussion, questions. Most welcome. Thank you.
Hari Om Maharaj.
Hari Om, yeah.
Maharaj, I had a question about one of the last things that you said. You said that positive impression created by the higher awakening or by the Ridambhara pragyas, the samskaras will block and neutralize all the existing negative samskaras in the mental system. So the way I understand it, and correct me if I'm wrong, but samskaras are tied up to the mental system, right? Positive or negative.
Yeah.
So are the Ridambhara pragyas, samskaras created by them, also tied to the mental system? Is the mind that generates these samskaras, or is it from a higher level of subtlety?
Yeah. You know, actually, when you practice yamas and niyamas and reach perfection in the practice of yamas and niyamas, and when you go through this asana, pranayama, pratyahara, dharana, dhyana, etc., you actually reach a point where you have already succeeded in neutralizing all negative samskaras. Now, before we actually reach the highest nirbija samadhi, the penultimate state is you develop a great positive vritti or samskara. And that samskara is the result of Ridambhara prajna. And that actually neutralizes all the negative currents, negative samskara. I mentioned this earlier. I can give an example in ordinary life. Suppose people with a lot of distractions, dissipations, lot of distractions is the right word to use. If they can orient, if they can direct all their energy resources, physical energy, mental energy, in one direction, to achieve one great goal in life, you can find their distractions slowly decrease proportionately. Because this great goal is in your mental horizon. You're trying to achieve that great goal. It's an automatic process. Like that, when a person develops the Ridambhara Prajna, the Ridambhara Prajna, it manifests in the form of a great positive spiritual samskara. Actually all great spiritual teachers who have got the Ridambhara Prajna, they do have a samskara. But the samskara is this higher subliminal spiritual samskaras. And when they reach that point, all their negative samskaras get completely neutralized. This is what happens. It is a mental system, but so long as you live in this world, you cannot really live out of your mind. But you already experienced that it is possible for you to go beyond your mind. True, but still you are living with the mind, so long physical body is there. But you also are aware of the fact the mind itself is not the highest. Like you have a higher supramental dimension. But so what happens, of course in Vedanta also it is called, this as a penultimate state of reaching the highest state, it's called everything is perceived to be, it's called Brahmakara Vritti. Whatever you see around is realized to be non-distinct from Brahman. So Brahmakara Vritti. There is a Vritti is there. But that Vritti is not the disturbing impressions which are cluttered, which are accumulated in the mental system, which are always in a state of agitation. That Brahmakara Vritti manifests as one stable, tranquil condition. Because the Prajna Lakshana. That's the idea behind. Clear to you?
Yes,
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Most welcome. Thank you.
By the Shabda Pramana, you mean it's synonymous with Shruti Pramana and Veda Pramana, correct? So,
Yeah, actually, Shabda Pramana is called, as a Visheshana, is called Shabda Pramana. So, Shabda literally means what you hear from. So, Sruti, it's Sruyade Dharma Anaya. It is Sruti. This is the interpretation, definition of Sruti according to Mimamsakas, And then, Sruyade Paramatmana Labhanta Idi Veda. Veda has got, the Sruti has got another synonym called Amnaya. Amnayade Ubudishyade Paramatmanam Labhanta Idi Amnaya. Shankaracharya says. So what it means is, very simple. Meaning is that the source from which you hear about the ultimate truth, the ultimate spiritual realization, that is what is called Sruti according to Shankaracharya. And that source, those source books from which you hear about Dharma is Veda or Amnaya according to, or Sruti according to Mimamsakas. The point is, the word used is Sravanam. Sruyate Anaya iti Sruti means what you hear, something from which you hear. So that is the real definition of the word Sruti. It is Strilinga, it's feminine center. Sruyate Anaya iti Sruti. Now, what distinction is there between hearing and reading? When you read, actually you are hearing only. This is an important thing to remember. So Sravanam literally means hearing. Sravanam means hearing. And Sruti means a book or a source from which you hear about the higher values. So you may ask the question, I am not hearing, I am only reading. Remember, when you are reading a book, you are listening actually. When you read something, actually you are listening only. This is an important thing to remember. So even a person who is completely deaf is hearing when he is actually reading something. But because the words connect with you not as dead print. That's only, after all, a book is nothing but something made from cotton. It's made in a factory, and some printing technology and the ink that is used for printing. But it connects with you, comes to you in the form of word. A word is essentially the fundamental source of word is hearing, not reading. So that is the genius of defining the entire verbal testimony as Shabda Pramana. It comes to us in the form of Shabda. Shabda is actually spoken word, and spoken word can only be heard, cannot be read. So this is an important point. When you, let's say, maybe Bobby can throw light on this subject. See, when a poet or a musician reads a poem, you are actually hearing. Am I right, Bobby? You are not reading. Am I right?
That's right.
Eh?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Without hearing, you won't be able to enjoy, actually.
That's right. I was thinking of the musician also.
Yeah.
If a musician is processing the hearing in the mind, you know, as opposed to
precisely.
It slows down. Yeah, it slows down the actual experience of flowing into and through the music.
Yeah.
The poets are working the same way.
Precisely.
There is a bit of a prior understanding of how it works. Yeah. So it's almost like when attorneys are reviewing proof as evidence, what's going to work as proof. It doesn't come to a standstill. There's prior study into the epistemology of these things, so that the flow of information becomes so natural that the science of it fades into the background. I think that's what you were speaking of earlier when you were saying that we review the books in order to go beyond the books.
Yeah. So actually, really speaking, even when you read a book, you are hearing without using your ears. There's a kind of hearing without using ears. There's a kind of seeing without using your eyes. This is an important thing to remember. That's why you're reading the Vedas. When we read the Vedas, we're actually hearing the Vedas. Reading doesn't really help you. It doesn't enter your mind, your heart. Listening alone can enter your heart. And when you're reading with the great sanctity and sacredness, you are actually listening. That's why Vedas, one of the synonyms of Vedas is Shruti. And Shruti means something from which you hear about something, not read. The entire Veda volumes of the Vedas may be in front of you. But those printed alphabets or the printing ink that is used and the papers that are used from maybe paper factory, they are immaterial. But the word itself connects with you. That's why we are able to connect with. That's why Sruyate, the word Sruti is used here. Sruta means actually what is heard. That meaning. The word Sruta means what is heard. So reading is never even mentioned, not even implied. What is used is what is heard. That's the meaning of it. Yeah.
Maharaj, something very important on this subject just popped into my mind, and that is that you asked me to comment as a poet, so I will do that.
Yeah, please, please.
The central prayer, the fundamental prayer from the Judaic tradition starts with the word Shema, and that word means hear or listen. Yeah. And it doesn't mean read it.
Precisely, yeah.
It means hear it, and there's a suggestion that you're internalizing it in a very natural way.
Yeah. Thank you for that very, very important and very relevant statement. So that's why all ancient scriptures talk about hearing, not about reading really. So Swadhyaya itself, of course, the central meaning of Swadhyaya is you're uttering or you are listening to pranava or sacred sound. When you actually read, you are hearing it. It is that hearing that actually, that's actually the spiritual discipline. When you hear your own reading, really, that's what actually takes you forward in spiritual life. That's an important. Even a deaf man can read and hear. Remember, if I can give this is a great proof. A person who is born deaf, he may be able to read very well. When he actually is reading, he is hearing. But his hearing is different from the hearing of a normal person. In that hearing, he is not using his ears, he is using only his mind. So that's an important thing to remember. That way Sutta. See, the sutra is Sutta Anumanam Prajnabhyam Annivishaya. Sutta actually means what is heard. Very often, when you read the translation, what is heard, it should be understood in that sense. Thank you.
In the Indian scheme of things, anything which does not accept Veda Pramana, Shruti Pramana is considered Nastika. So for instance, Bauddha Dharma is Nastika, it doesn't accept Veda Pramana. Correct?
Yeah, actually, that is true. Actually, the original Buddhist philosophers, especially those who derived their authenticity from the Pali canonical literature called Tripitaka, Sutta Pitaka, Vinaya Pitaka and Abhidhamma Pitaka, they rejected the Vedas, but they had their own Shabda Pramana. These Tripitakas are the Shabda Pramanas for all the Hinayana Buddhist systems like Sri Lanka, Burma, Siam, many of these countries they follow, especially Sri Lanka and Burma, they're strongholds of Hinayana tradition. For them, this Pali canonical literature is the Shabda Pramana actually. They may not accept the Vedas, but what you find in Sutta Pitaka is mostly found in Bhagavad Gita and Vedas actually, really speaking. The entire Dhammapada, 26th chapter, Varga, Brahmana Varga it is called. It is almost a verbatim version of the Sthitaprajna Lakshanas. Who is an ideal person? Tam Bhuhi Brahmanam. That's how Sutta Pitaka completes in Pali. It is that, Sthitaprajna Stadochyade. Such a person is called Sthitaprajna. But in the Sutta Pitaka, in Dhammapada, it is called, him I call a Brahmana. Brahmana means Sthitaprajna, a spiritually wise person. That's the real meaning of it. So, Buddhist canonical literature constitutes their Sabda Pramana, their welfare testimony. Though they rejected the Vedas, in that sense they are called heterodox systems, but still they have their own Sabda Pramana, welfare testimony. That is the Sutta Pitaka. The entire Pali canonical literature constitute their exalted welfare testimony, Sabda Pramana. So Jainas, who are Nastikas, means they don't accept the Vedas, but they have their own Sabda Pramana, welfare testimony. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. So thank you for the wonderful participation. I very much enjoyed the participation of many of our friends, who make this session much more lively and much more effective in the broader sense. Thank you. Namaskar. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.